do Jayana Bamela, Jayakama, Bamoto, Bajavanda Homa, the Vajizak of Jayakama, Bajavanda, the Padino was of Jalang and Benjamin, to go to walk at you, so on the Zokajuno Monojiba, the non of the Java, Home Jogam Bazumai. Senagana Chajimi Bada said it is a job of Jimara was in Jolombo, Jumbo, Mimati, Jibana, Junda, the Begum Juna, Jimmy Mugu, was the Jolo Uniform Jimu Jasaway. Kachas of Bango, some of them have taken you from Jina, and over the Jolan of Bango, Jugosumay, and Jawai, Mangaro, Java, Juna, for the Yamido, and Yanda, and the Miji Jabala. Satalam Jayon, there are only those younger companions, though you in Moho, Conjola, Young, one just the butter, and what you do, but the Jola go on there, Conjola, just in Badan, and other ones that just in your man. So then the Jadra meant them, but you don't know each of go on there, nothing of that is you on the not much more than catching them much of that, just on the Jola, just all years on, 2001 they made them. Nanda Saja Dova, Gomboja, Jimmy, Moja, Jimmy Doja, John, and Mo, Gada, Jimmy, number the one of the Hito, you were going on the Yellow Moja, Doji, Yolo, and Salang Baja, Jawada, among Yoda, the 13 years on some million letters only the Yembe legend by Joe, and the agenda, Chiji, and Romy Mojo, Gilado. Simply don't do the dungeon of the budget and the he only read it only sugar tony, manga tony, sound tony. David and Mango, you heard it. He did only you and the young Della, some to get to Mango, sorry. And I won't see your marriage. Can't see your marriage. You know, don't tell them what they see your marriage. Tango, Pa Tong, don't you are. They were Mala Tong you are, they should go it. So lean, you didn't you, but they should go it. Or ditching a part, they were doing the selling out, looks on it. Longer than a shitaba. They didn't wash your kitchen for your head.
So today the subject is the giving and taking, giving happiness and taking the suffering practice. And generally there are different kind of practice. It's called outer practice, inner practice, and very secret practice. There are kind of like three kind of levels of practice. Rinpoche said himself is not really expert on that in the philosophical sense of that. So anyway, the main point is very simple. There's it's like giving means you give all of your happiness to all the sentient beings, and taking means you take all the suffering of others towards yourself. So and then in order to practice that, we must have a kind of confidence to ourselves that there is a possibility to give happiness to all the sentient beings and to take the suffering of others towards one, for oneself. So this is like it happens, and one must have a kind of confidence in order to practice that.
Tenidela, you said only in a tata, Nanga Ranga Tambo Satu sent a gene. Lindsay Piushine, Tenidanga, Litang Agatoni, Nipa Chechon, let them there. Then it was a sentient of Pin Tapa. Tambo Daji Yamba, Tenidaji Jiva, or Teni Chechon, say don't it.
So the outer practice, which is actually the mainly the practice of the body and speech. You just you understand the benefit of actually generosity towards all sentient beings, and you give all the help, all kind of helps to your body, to your speech, and so this is actually regarded as a the outer practice of bodhicitta. For example, it includes also to give your body for the benefit of all sentient beings. Even you really sacrifice your your children, your parents, all this, and all of your wealth towards all sentient beings. This also includes the first practice, outer practice. So even just giving some kind of small food to the birds and dogs, all this actually a form of actually giving, another form of giving. And whenever you eat like sweet, maybe if you give this sweet to maybe a child, it is also a giving practice. The secret practice of giving and taking practice is that to practice the Mahamudra, to realize or to remain in the state of Mahamudra is the secret practice of the giving and actually taking. So, first of all, in order to practice, giving and tracking, first of all, it's important to know to know the suffering of the others. The suffering of birth, suffering of old age, suffering of the sickness, suffering of dying, and suffering of hunger, or suffering of starvation, and suffering of poverty, and we have to understand all kinds of sufferings, of the others, and then we have to also understand that all the suffering actually comes from misunderstanding. The reality, the basis or the reality of the phenomena is actually non-existence. It is, and the sentient beings actually could not really understand the reality of the phenomena, which is non-existence, and even like the suffering, the reality of the suffering, they could not really understand that. So, for example, when a very strong afflicting emotion like anger arose, we actually could not really see the nature of the anger. If we really analyze and if we see the nature of the anger while it arose, then we will see that it is lack of form and color, and there's nothing actually, such anger inside there that you can really see through the form and color. So it's like a space, free from all this direction of the east, where all this. So, but the ordinary people or the other sentient beings could not really understand that, and they think that it is really existence. The anger is really existence, and all the suffering is really existence there. So then, and then, sort of, self-clinging is there, and then, and you start to create a lot of actions in order to, remove that anger. You start a lot of accumulates kind of actions, that brings a lot of, again, more multiple sufferings.
Then dungi the pena, say dungi, nang dungi ta mimong bari, say dungi ta ta musu tongwa, yuwa jet namba ta say dungi, ta ta long na ti be tene nang dungi, te tamji so 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 yo, sa dungi te nam to de so yo, nam to de la yo, to to sa dungi de le teke.
So there's three kind of, actually, three kind of causes of the suffering. That's like the outer causes, like five elements, and our body, the suffering, and then comes the suffering of the body, and the inside, the suffering, cause of suffering is like afflicted emotions. It's like, and then mental anxieties are coming, causing that, and the inner or the secret part, the cause, the main essence, the real cause is like the thoughts, conceptual thoughts. So we have to understand all this, the causes of the three kind of causes of the suffering.
Yeah, namdo tamjene da chadang yongsum ke yo yo pena. Ta ta dang so me thole chaben den pena dungi chibon ta ta pena or yakha ta me mang le dungi ta leb yo ha. The kang le leb jidi ge leb samo ta da pena. Oh, tamu ni mare pa jin ta ma ti ngala pe ma si be ya po dewo ti chong yo le. ngala ne ba te ta tang ni de la ta se na ta ngala cha ne ngal pe ma si be chu ko oh ngala ne ba ta ni yi ne pe ta chi o le ta ne ba ta ko le la da la cha ne jin la dang ji cha dang yi te chu ba yin ba ju chi bo yin ba te ha ko yo ma ta ko tu no ba da ta tang lo le te nam to wo ji yo sa mo tang ta de ta te ko no tu na ra ge jo pa byo ne te ran cha o le ta ni shou che te la tang da ta ni jin le ba ta ji che sa mo tang ta le ba da ta tang na te ne ba tang ye le ninjur 성결 이자게 된 다큰 걸 봐. 나오는 봐 이거를 봐. 네 하루 내가 말아. 네 초코가 네 말을 봐. 말 소용이 다 하고 오요 말이. 팔을 봐 다서는 저거 들고. 자당 몽둥이 뒤에 있다. 남도 없고 진도 상 하고 그래. 되나.
맞아. So all the what do you call the main sources of all the suffering and all the other cause of suffering actually comes from the conceptual thought. And conceptual thought is actually produced by, emotions like, desire, anger, ignorance comes from that. For example, like, all this, when we really investigate, when we really analyze the suffering of the nations and those individuals, all the suffering like disaster, all these things, or what you call, which is happening throughout the, world. When we investigate all the sources of that, comes from ignorance or misunderstanding, unaware of our own, actions. For example, we want happiness, we don't want suffering. And in order to get happiness, we do everything, what we can. We do everything, even we really, we harm other sentient beings in order to get ourselves happiness. And all this, and we put all our money, all our energy to get our own happiness and to destroy other people's, other sentient beings' happiness, We don't really care for other sentient beings. We all the time put a lot of energy in order to get happiness, or to ourselves happiness. And all this actually, and we don't really realize when by harming other sentient beings, will bring a lot of suffering, multiple, countable suffering towards oneself. We don't realize that. We think that by destroying others' happiness, we'll get some happiness, but in fact, it brings more happiness, more suffering to oneself. It is like whatever you do will get back, So all these things actually created by our own conceptual thoughts. And conceptual thought actually produced by those everyday emotions, especially the misunderstanding of the reality. So this misunderstanding is called ignorance.
너는 무슨 주비에 있는 대형 파사테네 빼놓고 레사 뉴모베 레사 레전 남반 된다고 아 지금 제가 연구를 맡아봐 제가 그냥 내가 매화 같은 연구요 말해야지 그냥 준비했더니 연구요 해야지. So this is real existence actually, all this suffering which comes from all this, what you call misunderstanding or conceptual thought. It's really existence in this world. Everybody is going through all this, suffering. And when we analyze that, it's not just comes by only one cause. So many
it's like interdependent. You know, all this suffering comes from, you know, we call it tender, you know, in Tibetan, but it is like not only we ourselves, but a lot of coming from a lot of gathering of cause and conditions, and happens this, you know, suffering.
야, 되니 대답을 좀 했지. 다 무슨 되니 마종와. 딱 같이 데모 가면 내처 가야 마종와 파티는 다 기보지 돼요, 그래. 되나? 대다 담기를 능해요 말해야지. 예. 올래. 저거는 대화서 기보지를 안 시작을 가면 만도 봐.
No.
대화 담기는 내 강에 돼. 마륵바 코나 리게 따와니 능해지 받고 마륵바라 저 마륵바라 띵 그래. 마륵바의 요리 정대 저 흘라던 미게 대화 토는 뭐 흘라게 대화 토는 주다가 능해요 그래. 되나? 되는 따와 마륵바는 마상을 받아 탐지에 능해기라지. 말이 배. 야, 근데 차잖아. 따다다 빼네. 능해를 강인지는. 야, 방고도, 어디다 숙보도 다 능해 줄이고 말이야. 나 숙보도 정도 되니, 나 능해 매 쌈지가 그래. 숙보도 비해서 들리, 누구 방고를 주 얘들을 갈아 톱처럼 다 이기 공들해, 원래. 네. 산이 갈아 양봉 모자, 어제 나저 매사 뒤 능해 되니, 마도도 집에. 코 싸먹 가요, 말이야. 야, 숙보 요독 되잖아. 빼놓고. पेशा बम काथे वाले तीर टांका पेशा रेरे टांका का दांजी तेरे पे न को वाले ते याजे सुन रेवा मादल थोपा दोंगे रेरे पे 총고 마 차서 티 동에 대 삼제 마 잡고 수보 동에 치 버려 와 걔는 수보 요도 그래 와
You know, sometimes we may think that that not everybody is going through suffering. Yeah? You may think that those who live who live in, you know, happy life, there are many people we see a happy person, you know, seems like they don't have any suffering, but it's not actually when we really investigate and we really, you know, see their problem. Why they have no kind of, you know, happiness is, you see there's a lot of rich people, a lot of what you call happy, seems like happy from the outside, and have done now a lot of suicide. And there are so many cases of suicide there. So all these things comes from the ignorance, still this misunderstanding of the reality, or misunderstanding of the suffering. So, for example, no matter how much, you know, it seems they have happiness, you know, it seems from the outside they have happiness, but deep down in their heart, in their mind, there is a cause of the suffering. There is a cause which is ignorance, which is the misunderstanding of the reality. Even you attain the level of the God, you know, which is regarded as you know, the highest level of happiness in the beings. So even those, God has a lot of suffering. For example, we think that when we become rich, all the suffering will be gone, you know. And actually, how much you are rich, actually you have also, at the same time, you have also increased your suffering. You have a lot of money, and you are worried about losing the money. You are worried about that somebody is getting richer than you, you know, and you have to do all this protection, suffering of protection, suffering of losing it, suffering of all these things. For example, is those like beggar. You know, they have very less suffering. You know, whenever they get food, then they are satisfied. They don't have much really what you call. They don't have all this suffering of protection of the wealth, and you know, investing it and all the increasing that, they don't have all this suffering. Whenever they get some kind of food, then they live very happily, peacefully. So if you have more money, if you have more wealth, you have also more suffering at the same time. So is the question, is there possibility to reduce and remove completely of the suffering? Yes, there is the way of removing all the suffering, and the way is to practice the bodhicitta, the enlightened mind, and to contemplate the cause, effect, and karma, and practice cause and karma. And when you have this practice, and then all the suffering will, remove by itself. Why it is possible to remove by practicing this, enlightened mind and cause, effect, karma is because when you practice that, and you will not create further suffering, cause of the suffering. When you don't create the cause of the suffering, then there will be no actually suffering. So that is how one can remove the suffering. And when we understand that all the cause of the suffering is the ignorance, then we have to practice we have to practice the best method of removing the suffering is to practice the Mahamudra, and Mahamudra is whenever such a cause, misunderstanding arises, then investigate that kind of that mind, that conceptual thought, and when you investigate that, you will find out that it's like a space, so wide, so it's like a space. So, in order to before the practice, we actually take refuge, and also we, generate bodhicitta. And while we generate bodhicitta, we also say that, may all sentient beings, have happiness, and the cause of happiness is because all the cause of the happiness is actually to be aware or to be mindful of our own nature of our mind, and which is like a which is like a space, which is like a very wide. And when you have this kind of mindfulness of your own nature of mind, all the suffering, all the form of suffering and happiness are actually within that kind of scope, or actually it's part of that. All the suffering and happiness is nothing but actually it is by their nature, by its nature. So once those who have seen that, there's no more suffering actually at all, because it's like completely, free from the suffering. And so all the suffering actually dissolves by itself, by looking at your own nature of mind, remaining in that state of mind, will dissolve automatically. We don't need any struggle to remove the suffering. It dissolves itself, and we found that is the cause of all the happiness actually. And we really wish all sentient beings, to have that kind of understanding or awareness, or you can call it mindful of their own nature of mind. And then with that understanding, with that basis of understanding, one should really meditate on the one's own nature of mind, which is Mahamudra.
네 데려뜨린다. 다 동의다. 동의가 욕하는 해야 돼. 동의가 좀 말해봐래. 선진탐제 이전에 대충 뭐라 이 선진탐제 이전에 상기래. 왜냐면 뭐지 도저히 발음 따고는 도는 나오는 거예요. 이 말이. 선진탐제 사제요. 고통 말해봐 됐대요. 그래. 이 소소한 상태가 따뜻하다 레타 보다가 밤에 봐요. 뭐요. 그래나 밤에 봐요. 밤에 봤는데 동의가 동의가 밤에 반대가 다수나 근데 동의를 잘 동의 참아리 잘 노래 참 뒤등은 공이 양공 전에 되니까 드리제고 해 동의가 이제 밤에 반대를 잘 공도 심지 탐지 안 들릴 줄 아나 심지 탐지 이제 상계리 삼네 그래서 안 말해.
So all the cause of the suffering is ignorance, and all the sentient beings are basically enlightened from but it was obscured by so many obscurations. And those who have not understood their own nature of mind, it is kind of natural or habit of being careless of the suffering of the cause of the suffering. So the careless to the cause of the suffering is the actually main cause of the suffering. So it is the main kind of obscuration that obscure us to be enlightened. So when we find out that we are in careless of the cause of the suffering, then we have to be careful. We have to be careful to the cause of the suffering. And when we have this kind of careful of the cause of suffering, which is like, and then we will we will be free from all the suffering. All the suffering will not affect, and then we will liberate completely from this world. So it's really very important to understand the nature of the suffering and to understand the cause of the suffering. All the suffering actually are, same. There's no difference. Our self-suffering and suffering of others, all of them are same. And all of the cause of the suffering, afflicted emotions, are the same. There's no difference in that nature. It's like there are so many different kind of beings in the ocean, but ocean, there's no difference in the ocean. Wherever you look at ocean, it's the ocean. So when we understand that, then when we practice, when we understand our own nature of mind and meditate on that, and all the suffering decreased of all the sentient beings. The suffering that we are going through will decrease, and automatically the suffering will either become less. It's like it's like there's so many oceans. Yeah, if you take some part of ocean to other part, the ocean becomes less. It's like it's like a strong heap of things, a big amount of things. Press, one small things, which is like emotion, afflicted emotions. If you take slowly some part of that, so the amount of pressure becomes less. So similarly, when we do that, it actually affects, those people. They will have more kind of, their suffering will be reduced, and the cause of the happiness will increase to them. So there's no actually difference actually. So we have to understand that there's no difference in the cause of the emotions. There's no difference in the suffering of oneself and others.
땅이 동일이 고공도 고도 시각한 적이마도 천리시야 말 실제시나 다디 남발 시바데 당하게 동일도 톡고도 없으면 디 고아지 다 세종하라 세종하는 때는 다 같은데 미시와 대다가 동에 타주고 생지긴 간단하게 제거를 안 지래 맞아봐라 지래 대야상 텀내야 내가 왜 와서 용사 비노란 말이야 랑도래야 한국 와서 오래야 미담제 랑디요 말라 미담제 랑디면 다 밑에다 생겨 밑강이 마모 셔래 빼쳐대 빼차잖아 가장 좀 통을 세워 마도래게 남을리는 다 미시를 반찬이요 말이야 추침보면 추수를 까마리리 그냥 지마모 시도 올라 딱 가장 좀 통입니다 참 sem체리 되게 눈이 좀 여지 되게 sem을 꼬마는 이라지 세어버려 눈이 되다가 리tin 통거를 말아 이제 말을 이제 네 연구이고 이제 하고는 너무 연구야 말. 뒤 눈이 좀 까미 다시 눈이 가리 타제고 그래 되나 배나 당고 보사기에 다는 다다 나와네 강바 야랑 메차마 숭나다 동에 메와 뒤문에 동에 메와 타도 말마 야 뒤말에 가리 생그대로 보고 해. 가리를 지내 힘이 미대다 앞에나 다 동네가 연구를 했지. 미대다 가리 욕시송은 나 직접 쉬어 말이잖아. 야 같이 있는 출신이 그 고도 양이시기 때문에 고도라서 내야지나 벌써 그랬지. 오래 또 대문 제담지 다 별로 되는 게 다 동네 연구 요리. 대담지 동네 따와 가리 다 말했지.
So, the temporary, the happiness, the way of achieving temporary happiness is like, for example, recently, a week ago, there was a, terrorist attack, and a big, building collapsed, and so many people died under that attack. And usually all this, the way, usually our tendency, to have a temporary happiness, our way of thinking is, if the building was, not collapsed, if these people were not died, if people survived, if people actually, if when building, the collapsed building was, actually built again, if these people, those who died, came into life, and all this suffering, came into happiness, this is actually our way of thinking to get the temporary happiness. We have a lot of now suffering that because of the building collapse, so many of these things, people died. Now we want all this building be as before, and all these people working in there be as before. And when it happens, then we start to feel happiness. That is usually our tendency, our habitual tendency to have a temporary, happiness. But that is also a little bit like, not really mindful or aware of our own, aware of cause of the real happiness. Okay, when all these phenomena, building and people, there are so many people constantly dying. Millions and millions of people are actually dying all the time. There is no way of stopping actually at all, And by seeing that immediately, it gives us such a shock, that they are dead, or somebody killed them and they are dead. But actually, nobody could stop of dying. Actually, we are on the dying process. Every phenomena and all the beings are in transition. So nobody could stop that actually. It is dying, if we are really careful, if we really investigate it. There's so many millions of dying all the time, but we are not really aware of that. And it suddenly happened we were kind of shocked. So actually those, in order to give the happiness to them, to those victims of that attack, is to liberate their consciousness, which is not died in that collapse, in that attack. Their physical body is dead, but their consciousness is still wandering. So if we want to really, liberate them, or we want to give them some happiness, we have to give we have to liberate their consciousness, which is wandering in this, world. Physically dead, but consciousness is still alive there. So, they who have already know some Dharma, who know already, the way of practice, maybe they have liberated themselves, yeah. But there are so many people who have no idea at all about this practice and maybe still wandering there. So what we can do is we have to actually liberate their consciousness. And that is actually the way of giving the practice, not just, bring back to their life, and put the building back to a normal. It doesn't really give the happiness. It will, again, it is in transition. So, Muji said, whenever there is a loving kindness, or whenever there is a love, a compassion, there is a help. It's like there is a handful of helpers. So, in order to have wherever there is a bodhisattva, not only here, not only this, whenever they see the suffering of people, automatically their sense of compassion is there. No matter which country, which place, automatically their loving kindness or compassion is there. So, and then the sign of compassion is like cheering and all this, And so now, when we understand all these things, so now we have to liberate all these consciousness. They are there in order to help them, in order to give them, some happiness. The best way is we ourselves visualize. Those who are male visualize as Avalokiteshvara. Those who are female can visualize as Tara Devi, Green Tara, and then we visualize all the consciousness into a small kind of seed. That's a small kind of grain. Every consciousness, even though there are so many people died, all of their consciousness can be visualized as a small form of a grain, and it is there. All can be, dissolved into that small size of grain. So then, when we visualize ourselves as Chenrezig, the deity of compassion and the green Tara, then visualize Vajrayogini on the navel, our own navel, and visualize ourselves as a central channel, and there's a two, what you call branch of channel, and actually connects to the navel. And then you breathe in all the consciousness, which is in the form of a seed of grain, grain, size of grain. Breathe in, and it enters from the branch of the two side channel, and put, it enters from the Vajrayogini's sacred part, and then transfer those consciousness to the Amitabha's mind, very big Amitabha's above your head. You transfer all this consciousness in the form of grain to the Amitabha Pure Land.
Control tamsiadani ninsala tomata kinede geti romana yosong sa control nakana yasong tani gongore.
And all of them 지금 오바면 팀이 뭐라
아바미 저걸 했던
오바면 그걸 제네스나 지금 좀에
이제 루마 전에 했던 거라.
All this, and the space, they become like, in the form of Chenrezig and Tara, and then, dissolve into the Amitabha's, mind, wisdom.
좀 좀 먹고 한번 이 사마들이 지내서 봐면 이제 지와 진행하나 지금만 보는 바로 봐면 이제 배송 상관들이 디지털이 와도 그래.
You can also kind of visualize that all of them has manifest as a Chenrezig and Girantara, and they fly like a fly through the Pure Land.
Nitaado da bella yuti kawla yoba tamche la bella. Nete ba dogo sempi tamche na. Tin roa do re ju go na de. Yam go na yo. Yam de chape. Tao jewa de je go le. Yang ta yang da phama jewa sa chuk sem. Sabi teng de ya po je de na kang go na le sa wo yo go de na. Lam je sem na to thap je sam ma ta le kham sem se ji ta jo wang je sem le cha. Je jewa je thna. 다들 못 가려고나 요거를 감성 심기 담치에서 동의겠다 말을 말해 말을 빠지더니 유무가 예세계도 크던 창거리 오래 말 빠지더니 도안하고 이제 배를 그 돈도 못 받아 뭐 진짜 아까 나오는 야탕 근데 너지 보면 매를 보면 되게 매를서 그랬더니 동성 그랬더니 사자 챙겨 동건 그랬더니 파도지 챙기 담치더니 랑을 뒤에 시작 나를 뒤시되어 제 코도벨라 니마샤가는 예더니 보나 아니 배는 니 도르지 팔라는 니마자는 탁탁탁 제게 니 고도 라라라는 산이더니 동담be 제바 통네 더니 나중에 봤자 남의 동도래 니 고도 라라라는 산이야 니 등리리 보는 데바리리 다로 그랬나 데바타디 가네 마드라바는 도도지 니 송송그 생기 담시 토리 좀 넣고 그래. 토리 좀 넣는 게 동의지 담지 배나 니랑 그 살을 내고 그래. 니랑 그 살아 상마제비들이 담지 산지에 사도 사족tum이라면 르비 정공 르비 노요했더니 땅서 공부해.
노르지 파목이 꿀러.
도와줘. 고지 말해봤다. 말해봤다 봐요. 라. 그 소소라 말해봐요. 라. 소소리 깨다지 말해봤다. 유모가 깡 찌라. 그냥 시당치보를 깨라. 뒤값도 다 시당치 쪼오치는 딱 합성 심지에 담지 시당치 뒤되면 때문에 되니 시당치 때문에 이 세상 대화랑 드니 돌지 방도 깔았다는 면사. 이제 대사들이 매지 우지 빼놓고 감정 생기 담지 니마샤는 게 보고. 이 고소를 안 하게 빼놓고 핑바다 내버려 뒤에 시합을 봐. 어떻게 고소 말을 받아 자신은 시합을 안 쳤고. 아니 이 시고 빼놓고 고소를 안 해서 대만 통으로 말을 받동에 이제 철 내네. 내버려 빼놓고 네 빼나. 다 비비시랍 또 파대고 그래. 비비시랍도 뺀 때는 무보대 때지 이래래. 오타테 장어체로 돼서 올라가나.
So Rinpoche said that it is the practice of giving and taking is convenient when we have a strong practice of loving kindness. When we have a loving kindness, a genuine loving kindness within ourselves, then this practice is very simple, very easy. One can practice very easily. So it's important to have loving kindness, like understanding all this sentient being is your mother and love, beloved. And when you have this kind of understanding, then automatically loving kindness develops within oneself. So once it is developed, then whenever you look at things, you will have all the vision of all the six realms beings, the beings in the six realms. And when we have the six beings realm, six beings of the realm, then we see a different kind of form of sufferings they have, and all of their cause, the cause of the suffering is nothing but actually ignorance. And you take all the ignorance of the cause of which is the cause of the suffering, take in the form of a smoke, the black or dark smoke, take into oneself and take and then dissolve to the form of Vajra Yogini. Dissolve Yogini. And Vajra Yogini is kind of like in the form of like fire, which has a lot of light. So this kind of all this the smoke dissolve into Vajrayana or burned by the fire of Vajra Yogini, and then the light of the mindfulness of the wisdom, we have to give the cause of happiness now to those all sentient beings. Their cause of the suffering is taken already, so they are kind of like a pure diamond now. All of the sentient beings, all of the consciousness of the sentient being is like a pure diamond, not really covered by mud or this. They are kind of a pure diamond. So, and then we radiate a kind of light, which is actually manifestation of mindfulness of our own mind, radiates to the all sentient beings, and then they all sentient beings, their defilements become less, and then they have they will have the understanding of non-existence, and there's no more self-clinging, and they will get those the being in the real lower realms attains the human form and the God form, and those God or human liberates to the arhatship.
Tatate, Tonglen to the chair, Penatata, Yumuba Chevka, Yumuba Kankina Tenigo. In some ton of Penarag, Sembum Oya, Tong, Lumiyame, they send the Deva Temple, Choa Level. Tigame, oh, Tati was entered in the Ranga Deva Kang, Jena, Jessimpi Tampia Theatre, Jehu, Simpi Tampia, Sem the Ranga Semi Yaba, Teni, one Simpi Tampia, Top you also, the Deva Tenipa.
So whenever you get such a strong emotion toward to yourself, like anger and attachment, and also So this, and then, for example, you have a very strong anger. You take all the angers of all sentient beings and dissolved into yourself, form, and then radiates light, which is lack of, anger, and which is actually the mindfulness, and give them mindfulness, which is the cause of the happiness. And sometimes when you practice that, sometimes you may recognize your own natural mind, and that brings you a lot of peace and happiness in your mind. And when you have this kind of happiness and peace, and and all the sentient beings, the mind of the sentient beings and your mind are actually the same nature, the same level. So you give all happiness that you get from the practice of recognition of your own natural mind. You give all this happiness to all, radiates in the form of happiness to all sentient beings.
예수 기록 답변은 뭐뭐도 국배 있는 게 기본도 가지래. 거기들이 나사 돈이 지는 나사래고 빼지 가보시는데. 나사들려면 빼라. 다들 뭐 손을 저기 방법도 공고 저기 방법 매나 막 공네. 다리지 다리 나사다 정도 가게 빼라. 근데 야 막는 잡으면 저기 방법 걸다는 매니저는 빼라. 근데 매니저는 그냥 가서 또 먼저들 빼라. 생별 세마기들 맨 싸다는 매니저로 와. 다리 나타 동부들이 봐 매니저. 근데 다리 이렇게 보이나 기내를 걸어지를 모네 집지로 걸어. 전에들이 내 바트들이 싸대면 사태다 대나다. 되게 공부를 해. 동인지 나빠라더니나 지문은 인형지로 와. 진진이 매를 매 싸잖아. 그 소소라 내 밤에 차차라 되게 공부를 해.
다 소소 그 내디 소소 때문에 내지라. 내디 소소 거나 네 전주 선박이 다 전주 선박 그 두다로 그래. 페난다 미진
내바드나
네미 내바가 내지라. 내바가 내디 소소 거나 같이 다 렌투로 와. 렌은 소소 딱 소소 내디 포대나 디 야보를 쏘는.
때 매번 돈인데 이게 산소스 막는 인형지 말에. 포보고를 다 돌아. 뭐 소원 빼는데 다다다 인형지는 그냥 내 엄으로 와. 대고 될때 때와 매우 범되나 네 다리에도 답답해 빼나야 도와나 버려. 다 유문 말이. 내 때부터 그리고 내 싸워서 유문 배지요. 유문 같아가 빼는 랑은 유문 바 강이나 뒤에는 좀 되게 매사서나 매서 보면 내 밭에라 핑계요. 소소는 내 밤에라. 매일 저도 보면도 매일 가서 도지 보면 왕거가 매일 매일 저도 거네. 그걸 그것을 lep다 봐도 차되나. 되게 가리 거나 되게 핑계를 소소는 나사서나 되게 무슨 핑계요. 이게 나사나 양 핑계요.
So there's for the beginners of this practice sometimes sometimes it may feel difficult to practice that practice, especially when one has to check the suffering of the sickness, which is like contagious, like sickness. One may think that if I receive really the sickness, then you kind of sort of feel fear, to take that kind of suffering. And the real Bodhisattva would not really hesitate to take the suffering of this sickness, because they don't have kind of worries or fear of taking that, because they have such a kind of genuine, loving kindness to them. And actually, Muji said that we don't have to feel fear about that, because when we visualize ourselves in the central channel on the navel, there is a Vajrayogini in the form of fire, So you visualize, you take all the suffering or the different kind of sickness, and burns in the central channel by that fire. And those who have accomplished such a practice, they can really take the suffering or the sickness. They can really take the sickness to themselves. And sometimes they may affect physically. They may get this kind of suffering. But when there is no fear of that, all this sickness will, dissolve into fire. All this sickness becomes kind of fire itself. So it's like when you firewood, when you put the firewood into fire, so it becomes fire. So similarly, all these sickness become a kind of like a wisdom, or that fire or that Vajrayogin becomes your Vajrayogin. So it doesn't affect to the Bodhisattva because of the fearlessness. We sometimes, those beginners, maybe sometimes, if we have this kind of fear towards ourselves, that might affect. So we should not really feel fear of that and dissolve all this suffering, or take all the sickness and then, dissolve into the fire of Vajrayogini. Again, Rinpoche said usually, Rinpoche have already told you that during the Vajrayogini initiation, then we have to visualize a fire on the navel, and which is very important to visualize all the time. That there's a sense of fire, because it will make you more healthy, and it will give you some burn all these everyday emotions.
Chungpo zangsa tsewa jinsu yina, dunghe we kapsa, me de leo na, ti tsewa di togo tsari dunghe chidiri kecha she, soso dunghe we kapsa kecha she na, dunghe tsama lima tsarna, seme pe pingi yore, tari tsewa jinsi matala, tari suga tsewa yona, soso dunghe di kipa jinsi matala, lepke yore ba, pena. Yangu soni, puyinda sumo tsari je yina, pala tsewa yore, tsara tsewa yore, 제일 빼지 도보지 좀 라다는 거 떠잡아는 레고도 지 찌와가 또 그들이 용어요래 다르지 동네에 리드 핑이요래 빼나 원래 들이 뒤는 이 빼는 거 샘기 탐시를 찌와요나 샘기 탐시를 핑이요래 대디 무슨 샘대 찌봐야 다래 다들 샘대 찌봐야 다래 이 가야 되나 라마는 뭐요는 라마가 또방아 령 두고 해서 말하래 배 손 라마들 무지는 찌와래 라마라 하자 찌와 치보요나 라마들 공 가래요나 추심을 안 쇼게 레병거라 오 그가 해마고 원래 병거래 어떻게 저 파치 메시 찌와 치보되는 메시 찌오나 대화도요나 배 파치 찌와 가와요 제가 동네지도 레고 뒤 동네들 람상 같이 서로 레병거도 뒤나기 무슨 샘병이 샘들이 권도 오요래 제가 땅무슬 인투고래 동네 레바트 매바도 또
Rinpoche said that in order to do that, we have to make sure whether we can really do this or not. And when we have genuine love, compassion, genuine love, genuine pure, love. And usually we can really do that, For example, one of your, family members are affected by, some kind of, tragedy or whatever. When he has this kind of suffering, and we immediately feel that kind of suffering in ourselves, we feel that suffering, and whenever we talk that suffering to those who, who we love and who love to us, and we become the suffering kind of reduce, whenever we say, express our, the suffering, and it becomes reduced automatically. Why it reduces is that it shares, the suffering, automatically shares. That is because of love. Because of the love, it is also a sign of, equal of our own nature of mind. His mind and our mind. In reality, it is equal. Actually, it is equal, and that is why we can actually share. It is when we practice that, it's not that we are just imagining it. Actually, it really helps. It can really reduce the suffering of all the sentient beings by doing this practice. So does, in the family, those who have love between themselves. Similarly, this can, reduce the suffering of all sentient beings. For example, even the, devotion towards your Lama, your Guru, Milarepa said that because of the devotion towards your Lama, one can receive all the realizations of masters. Because of that kind of, because actually in reality, the mind, disciple and the student and teacher are in same nature. And when we have love, or when devotion, which is a devotion towards Lama, means actually it's a love, a great love. When one have a great love towards the Lama, so then all this realization, it can happen here to the student's mind. So this is all, can really, it is really effective. It does something. It really, does.
When so the Lama na bhave kathina desomura. So go mala thi tamna. So go semo thong tam go kami mala tap tara phin tho yo ma re. Ole. Kang le de pen na. Cha phol ka ma to me na. Te rang thong na thong ya yo me ne. Mala te ya yo ma re. Semo thong ne tini jorjo me ba. Pe ti ba khok chana. Tini mele ki musu phin ya thog re pe na. Tini George me ba. Mele ka che phin ta la George me ba. Ti ba thok ta di. Tini mele simpi ke go re so. Desong ti ta musu te ke ta de la. So so dama ga ti ba thok chana. Tini mele ka che ke na. Tini phama jang bo ta yin so. Te mele rang te ba ma thok ko ni mele ke la me ti phin thog re. Mele phin ke re ti. So so ne ba yang. So so ta. Chuk tha de so so.
So Rinpoche said that merely just, seeing your own nature of mind, portion of, merely seeing the portion of your own nature of mind doesn't really help much, if you try to teach on that basis of understanding. If you try to teach the other things, it doesn't really help much. If you have, when one have a full understanding of one's own nature of mind, and have confidence on that, and have experienced, and then whatever you teach, whatever it will really affects. It's like when you only a cup of water, a cup, a glass of water. If I drink all of that, then I can share, I can give this, everybody can, have actually that. If you drink, if there's a very few and so many people are there, you cannot really, everybody cannot get that, because this is a glass of water. So if I drink that and I become full of that, and everybody can share, can have that, drink.
Teni de pen la ta de tatang so to ni jang je de pen ta pen sob jang da ko che ke yo le mu su to ni de sa cho ko sin je wa je ta na le to ko yo le me je le ni ge bo le Penangogi, Visual Poatana, Malari Person, Tonam with Deba Matava, Hippo, Poamat, Rang the same one, Tonglen, the military Vakina. This is same with the Vakin, same water, so the Tabato. So to Demba Matonga, you know, the Ayomara. The depths of demon and so on. Rang and Corvette don't worry. Don't like him by it. Didn't have to say it to one new it. Rang Tambo, Penaco, same Demba Tonglen, and in Melapin to very. Tina, you to a penna. Sugar Tony and the Thomas and Joe sent it. Jehovah. Penacali sent it to me, Sancho, sent it to the Pama, but the younger one telecom Chichana. Then in butchered the shoulder. Lampang di Pamache, some tinted Java Chats, Lampang Butler, we need Java Jay. Penatata Topo from Montavilla, Coto, legislation. Oh, Tata was a Topo from Chado, you are muy lady. Oh, Pamache, Yamama Topo from Cheo, some Titivadina. Oh, Kasi, Yam the Mother Carter, Pinching, oh, lay one child, legendary. Kayo Marit, Ole. Koto ten Marita, that you are Chibolina. Oh, they are Chilka, Sa, so they are from a cherry. Take the Kata, take it, control Bena. Then you be my Hisana. Tiwa, she was Sancho sent you by the Benaco. Then make a pin daguna, Tilla, Tiwa Yoda. No, even the Pama, Pama, Chena, Tanga. The Nilo, Matata, no Batanga, this something. Tilitiwa de Tatama lived there. Tilitiwa Namjumeva. Sancho Temple, but the Majipana, Kijoti, that Jay or a penna. Simply the Pama is a Jay there. Jiba Yama may but then, what he got in the water down at his Zuba Gontaba. Or that Namjuma, Zuba Gontaba. Tilitiwa, that was a pit of it. You know, that means 75. Then he had been an idea. Oh, my shit, I think I tell you. Take one should go charge on you. See what they let go. See, I left. I think we will send with the Ryan. You give me a poor tips on you. You give me a film for two my song. Lamana baby, but so, someone cheer. You get a duck or something. So you don't have Pama, but it is the young son of the woman. Then you need to only repeat over it.
So Rinpoche said that for the time being, we are unable to do like those accomplished bodhisattvas. Those accomplished bodhisattvas, like real taking and giving and taking practice. But now we are in the process of training. We are training for that. When we are well trained, have a genuine compassion, then one can really, one can be very effective, of doing that. One can really do one can really perform as one wish. For example, because why one can do that is because of the genuine compassion. By practice, one develops a kind of a, wholeness of compassion, and when one develops that, then one is kind of definite that one will, do help one will help other sentient beings. For example, Milarepa said that while we do the poor practice to all the those who died, and Milarepa said those who have not realized the the direct emptiness, those who have not experienced the emptiness or cannot really perform the poor to those those dead people, and and which means that is those who have no compassion or complete compassion cannot really do the power of those type of depression. Why? Because when all the kind of help, one can really help when one has a genuine compassion. So when on the basis of genuine compassion, then one can really help. And also, when you have compassion towards all sentient beings, and when you have understanding of all the sentient beings have been once your parent, and when they are very kind as well, they were our parent. Then whenever you see a small insect, immediately you have been very kind of kind. You will feel kind of develops compassion to them. And you want to take the suffering of them because you have compassion to them. Even in your family, or your girlfriend or boyfriend, when they are separate, when they're separate, feels separate, and you or they don't like you, or they just leave you behind. Instead of getting anger, you feel more compassion to them, because you have the understanding that they have been once, your parent, a kind parent, and now this suffering of separation is happening because I haven't paid back the kindness while they have been my parent. So because of this understanding, instead of losing your compassion towards them, your compassion becomes more than before, or your compassion will increase. So it's really important to have this kind of compassion.
Tini tere tindi ridok chosu nebjang zikena manan ridok tini yigi kase maja tini gomne tini manan ridok riri ni hazen chune tabu di ridok dunghe di yapu gomne tini ridok dunghe riri gomne ti dunghe di ranga sembi thola lek wan kami tini ti ridok dunghe tamdi tari dunghe lek wan chidang chal du tini ti yang pa me sak kena tini yena ta dunghe di du dunghe di mebar tong tab kuyo le pena tata rangi chobo zuyena tini dunghe chimbo di wana ti dunghe di sochu zan le wana kami dunghe di jyota kange ye nyumu pali chongwa te shine ta rangi segi yune china dunghe di ramji me wale san tini semu wala ta tani semu wala te yamane jimde shipe pena rangi tari dunghe le wana dunghe di mebar tong tabna ta tari chichik di dunghe pengi wale pena tari je dunghe mebar tab ke jaake le jimde wana tuche rwa te maji ta mumba kare dunghe ki tangna dunghe ta chu khayo mare ta chu je dunghe ta prema ta te nyam de ke ja nga tari pena ta tari che wala dunghe che to ma to ngaje mena ma cha la ro tari che te te mare nga yo mare pena dunghe jitin kuwa dunghe de rang ji de ta dunghe di mebe tab tong go me lubo ga ta dunghe mang lo tong tari che go le pena dunghe mebe tab te tang so ge dunghe rang ji me ba dunghe de nam to le tari dunghe ser sem wo te tari dunghe di mi do le tari usi tari ji dunghe de nga ji te lob de le leb de te pa gom cha chona dunghe rang ji me wa cha do le ta usi tari ji dunghe lang ni de me ba tong to go
So we can also remove the suffering of all the sentient beings who remain in the 6 realms by visualizing the mantra of Chenrezig, Om Mani Padme Hum. Light, 5 kind of light radiates from the Om Mani Padme Hum 6-syllable mantra and towards all sentient beings, and all of their cause of the suffering dissolve, into light, and then burnt, all of their cause of the. And before we practice that, it is important to know the different kind of suffering in the 6 realms. We have to know the 6 kind of, the hell or whatever. It's important to know that. And for example, when your friend is in suffering, and when you hear that when your friend is in suffering, you feel kind of, also yourself in suffering. So it's like you're sharing that. And when you share the suffering of your friend, then you try to find out the cause of the suffering. And you will find out the cause of the suffering is kind of ignorance, misunderstanding, and the nature of misunderstanding is emptiness, is not really, it's like, so you meditate your own nature of mind and try to dissolve all the suffering by itself. And that will help to those, your friends' suffering. And also, you can also, another option is you can, talk to him and tell him that cause of the suffering is your own mind, afflicted emotions or ignorance. And why don't you, practice your own nature of mind, and by telling him, by showing him the cause of the suffering, and also the cause of the happiness, and that in that way one can reduce one's friend's suffering. But those who doesn't know how to solve this suffering, then they will create more suffering. They will just go to there, and they will just cry together with them and say, you're right, you have this suffering and all this, why, I don't know why, like all this sort of, kind of inspiration to have more suffering, and it creates more suffering. So it is not really useful. We have to reduce the suffering by showing them the cause of the suffering and, the methods of achieving the happiness. So you dissolve, when you visualize Om Mani Padme Hum, all the suffering of the sentient beings in the 6 realms dissolve, condense into the 6 syllables, and 6 syllables enters from your central channel and burned on the navel by the fire. That that is the practice. Also, while even in the deity practice in Vajrayana, we are also practicing the giving and taking practice, like when we visualize ourselves as a deity and chant mantras, and we radiate a light from the mantras and touches to all the sentient beings to their mind, and all of their cause of the suffering in the suffering dissolve into light, and and then disappears, disappears or removed by radiating the light, and all this, by radiating the light. In the practice of deity, you visualize yourself as a deity, and you chant mantra, and light radiates from your mantra, and light shines from your mantra, and then goes to all sentient beings and dissolve all or remove all the cause of suffering.
Mm-hmm. 되는데 또 나도 돈이 다다 싸움은 돈이 나도 돈이 이해요. 나도 돈이 너니 따라 빠져. 진짜 다 tem다마다 제가 통을 가면 너무 강하고 심통 너무 레퍼감이 들이대 거는데 마치 몰라라. 내가 레퍼감이 들이대 탈게 되나 된 거나 딴데 마치 몰라. 보통 와서 거는 싸움 돈이 되다 빼네. 누가 코랑 라미메 봐. 동우서 누가 대발 맞아 봐. 남도 인다. 이제 빼나. 동네야 메이도 그래. 빼는 것이 아마 샤서나 다 빼다가 동네 무조 봐요. 나와 찡찡 청소를 갈래 좀 하는 게 메이도 그래. 그것도 콘 따바랑 동네도 콘 딱
body or family, all this is the outer practice, and the inner practice is to that practice we have, which he has been talking, dissolving all this cause of suffering, and the secret practice or is to, whenever suffering appears, immediately look at that nature of the suffering, and suffering will just disappear by itself. The reason why it disappears by itself is because in nature, suffering is in transition, impermanence. We don't have to worry about it as an existence. It will just, for example, when we have the suffering of our mother died, the death of our mother, the death of our mother, the suffering of death of our mother will remain maybe 1 month, or if it is, maybe 1 month or few months, but then ultimately it will just go away. It is also kind of, proof of impermanence. So by nature it is impermanence. It will dissolve by itself. So whenever suffering comes, we don't pay attention to that. We just look at our own nature of mind or the nature of that suffering. And by that, it becomes a perfect giving practice and taking practice.
내가 가르치는 거를 되는데 나한테 매봤다 그랬잖아. 나한테 매봤던 거를. 내 신나 빼나. 동의교랑 이시바가 빼나 소속 동의들 내오나. 뒤주 동의 동원이 되고 소속 동의들 내오나. simply 탐지 동의 하고도 소속 동의 가래 말이 있으면더니 소속 동의가 라트를 말아. 내 귀는 막었나? 내 신이 막었나? simply 탐지 동의 가리 동의도 개래야. 기가 말이야. 가야도 그거 하면 왜 남탕 거쪽도 코도 거쪽도 야 가야 좋은 말이야. 내가 니도 소속 동의 때 장들이 노라 제들이 따라 쏘지. 따라 쏘지. 그래서 이제도 그 맛이 좋은 거야.
So, Rinpoche said this practice is actually very effective to remove the ego and self-clinging. When we practice that, then we don't really, worry about ourselves. We don't feel important towards ourselves. Whenever suffering comes to us, our own suffering comes to us, we understand the suffering of others. We have already understood the suffering of others and how big they are. And our suffering is very small compared to that. So we feel that it is just nothing. We don't feel kind of worry about our own suffering. If we don't understand the suffering of others, then whenever suffering appears to us, a small amount of suffering appears, we feel kind of like shocked, terrible, we are kind of like, uneasy, cannot really bear that, and that's how there's so many, suicide things are happening. Actually, all this are because the lack of knowledge of the suffering of others. For example, those who have understood, those who have seen the suffering in the Twin Tower in New York, and accidentally if your house was in fire, you wouldn't pay much attention to that because you have understood such a big disaster things happen in Manhattan. So it's like a good example of that. Yes, which is condition and yes.
Two. The first is Rinpoche described the practice involving the Amitabha's Pure Land above the head in the beginning, and seeing the beings, male, female, as Chinrezi and Tara.
Yeah.
And us as Chinrezi, I believe. Is that the visualization for the inner practice of Tonglen? Does it always include Amitabha's Pure Land, or is that just for more transferring consciousness?
So that when a pot is generation go more than the Chanju Sembek, Chanju same also Jisun Domang Comne. Tini Duduk Dot Simjin Dungo Simjin so and was there now to Timche Maritaumenang Timjitni. I mean the Wame Kobala, Parajirola. The Nang Yamle, Chi Yamle, Nang Yamle, Nang Yamle, Nang Yamle, 2000 continue Amitabha Gom de Ore.
She Tawami Nakala, Chimo, the Gomden and the Gray. Rangi Chetok, Chunum, the Gomnan, the Gray. They come the day, so. Generally, they pen also not I gather. The Abami Chimu, the Nakaka, the chapter when I get it. Gomdena, Basil Chocha, Karina, Tamakamse, Trico. They are cheated. They put us on your the Nangi Yamlenanga, I mean, the Wadi Kadin, never come there, they were Marason. I mean, the Trima had a year, some Gondo, he could read Kaditina, Lamsang Yunguyore, then it was so Dejago Malo. Don't the Mahale or like Tepa talk, I think, Dogo, Chudin, His Haji took a chap there. Like Tepa moved over thing about Meona, then he took out some tone of Tony, 7 more tone of control. Don't have with them on the Saji about the Pandero, don't number the night. Then he was so good up with an Tamu Park on the Saji about to see how you
But you said that yes, it is the inner practice of the Tonglen. And usually one has to visualize all the time that Amitabha is there, kind of like mindful of Amitabhas in the space. You can visualize small Amitabha on above your head and very big Amitabha on the space. So this is actually what you call Amitabha. The reason why he is there is actually what you call whenever thought appears, whenever thought kind of different kind of thought appears, immediately in order to kind of take our thoughts, visualize all the time like Amitabha is there in that practice. It is there because there is no actual difference between our own natural mind and the form of Amitabha. This kind of,
Other question was that Rinpoche said if a friend is suffering, you can speak to them about the
cause of suffering
and I want to be careful when I speak to people about lack of inherent existence. Emptiness, because I'm not a lama. What is okay for us to speak about so we don't scare people or make people angry for denying their suffering as existence?
मुझे ठोबोला दा खातना दुंगल की जू नीचे कर्ज वो मारे बर्रे तेयांतनी दा में बलते ने छुआ रेस पंबंगीला दा में बलते ने छुआ रेस ता देश जागो ना अनि तो उसकाले खाबो ना खजे जीता खोलला में टावर चोबा मारेस रोला खोरं चोबा मारेस नामने चिके मारेस तनी ठोबोल दिजोला दा ची दुंगल की जू मोडू चिते कर्जला फोटो से साजा मजना Kana tenera hashirana, Konso Sambo Kendabin courses are as.
Really, control pena. The really job, the really new about it. New about the pen, rather simple, they don't talk on. Don't get any new about it. New about it didn't take new about control the language, the control the language, control Koran Julie sound. Control there's a yard. Need over tea and a tomahawk. Ya control language, message to what you've done by Marita, which is how cook. So, time it okay, that on by Marita, you didn't. The kingdom will. Let Massa on you move a crown, that you must have you were you move a crown to my neighbor, same more by the you move on my nature to my head. Didn't study to be told of the day by them, they might have a couple. Could not a lady be to Chiboret. Lay Masaba Chiboret, you be to Chiboret.
Yeah, you Muji said that it is very difficult to understand, yeah, those people who have no what you call experience of their own nature of mind. Actually, to describe them or to show them the cause of suffering is difficult. But you can see, you can tell them the cause, effect, and karma, or the story of cause, effect, and karma. You can tell them that it is your own, what you call, emotion, every emotion that makes you more suffering. That makes you more suffering. If you just let go of your everyday emotions, then there is no more suffering. Let go of your suffering. And actually, when every emotion is kind of like a seat of the suffering, and if you follow that, every emotions, then there will be real existence of suffering. If you don't follow that, it is emptiness. Emptiness of the suffering. There's no more, If you look at that anger, strong anger, it is emptiness. If you follow that, then the existence of suffering are there. So all this suffering comes from action, and then the result will be suffering, and karma again.
Oh